Hi, and welcome to the Archive of History. It is just before dawn on the eastern Mediterranean. The sky above the horizon glows with the faintest trace of rose and gold, but the sea itself remains dark, almost black, touched only by the silver reflection of the last stars. The air is cool and heavy with salt. There is a wind coming from the west, steady and ancient, carrying with it the scent of open water and distant lands. If you stand very still and listen carefully, you can hear the gentle slap of waves against stone, the creak of wooden hulls rocking in their moorings, and somewhere in the distance, the muted call of a sailor preparing his vessel for the day's voyage. You are standing on the edge of a city that does not exist anymore, not as it once was. This is Tyre, the great island fortress of the Phoenicians, the city that gave the world the color of kings, the mother of colonies that would themselves become empires. This is a place where the sea was not a barrier but a highway, where merchants grew wealthier than monarchs, and where a small island resisted the mightiest armies of the ancient world for centuries. Tonight you will walk its harbors. You will breathe the air of its markets. You will hear the languages of a dozen nations spoken in its streets. You will witness its golden age and its fall. Before we drift off, I am always curious to know where my listeners are tuning in from and what time it is that they are listening tonight. Let me know in the comments. This is not just the story of a city. It is the story of human ambition built on water, of trade routes that connected 3 continents, of a people who mastered the sea when others feared it. Tyre was a city that invented an alphabet, perfected the art of navigation, and discovered a color so rare and so beautiful that only emperors and gods were permitted to wear it. The color was purple. The empire was built on a tiny island of stone, and for more than 1,000 years it was unconquerable. The ruins that remain today are silent. The great harbors are filled with silt. The causeway that Alexander the Great built to conquer the city is now a permanent land bridge, and the island is an island no more. But if you close your eyes and let the modern world fall away, you can still sense the echoes of that lost world. You can still imagine the forest of masts in the harbor, the smell of cedar and dye and incense, the chants of sailors offering prayers to Melkart before they set sail for lands unknown. Tonight we will travel back to that world. We will stand in the shadow of its temples, we will board its ships, we will live for a time in the city that time forgot. So settle in, let your breathing slow, let the tensions of the day dissolve like sea foam on ancient stone. And now let us begin our voyage into the past, to the lost harbor of ancient Tyre. The city you are about to enter was not like other cities of the ancient world. Most great capitals of antiquity were built inland, protected by mountains or rivers, fed by farmland and freshwater springs. Tyre was different. Tyre was born from the sea itself. It occupied not one island but 2, separated by a narrow channel of water, lying just off the coast of what is now southern Lebanon. The islands were small, perhaps half a mile in total length, rugged and rocky, their shores a jagged collection of limestone cliffs rising directly from the Mediterranean. There were no lush fields here, no forests, no source of fresh water, except for a single sacred spring that the Phoenicians believed was a gift from their gods. The land itself offered almost nothing, and yet, precisely because of this, Tyre became one of the wealthiest and most powerful cities in the known world. The secret of Tyre's strength lay in its harbors. On the northern side of the island complex was the Sidonian harbor, named for the rival Phoenician city to the north. It was a deep, sheltered anchorage, protected from the prevailing winds and currents, large enough to accommodate dozens of merchant vessels and warships. On the southern side was the Egyptian harbor, facing toward Africa and the Nile Delta, the gateway to the wealth of Egypt and the trade routes beyond. These 2 harbors were natural fortresses. Ships entering them had to navigate narrow passages between the islands and the reefs, channels that were easy to defend and almost impossible to force. The harbors themselves were surrounded by high stone walls and watchtowers, and the entrances could be closed off with heavy chains stretched across the water in times of war. To attack Tyre from the sea required not just a fleet but a mastery of naval warfare that few ancient powers possessed, and to besiege it from the land was impossible. The island lay nearly half a mile offshore, separated from the mainland by a channel of deep water. There were no bridges, no causeways. For an army without ships, Tyre was simply unreachable. The Phoenicians who built Tyre were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They did not march armies across continents or carve out vast territorial empires. They were merchants, sailors, and craftsmen. They built their empire not with swords but with ships, not through conquest but through commerce. And they did it from this tiny cluster of rocks in the sea. The origins of the city are lost to myth and legend. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, claimed that the priests of Tyre told him their city had been continuously inhabited for 2,300 years, which would place its founding somewhere around the 28th century before the Common Era, in the depths of the Bronze Age. Whether this is true or exaggerated folklore, we cannot know. What is certain is that by the time written records begin to appear in the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, Tyre was already ancient, already wealthy, already a power on the sea. The Phoenicians themselves left few written records of their own. They were a pragmatic people, more interested in ledgers and contracts than in grand historical narratives. Most of what we know about them comes from the writings of others, from the Greeks, the Hebrews, the Assyrians, and the Egyptians, peoples who traded with them, fought them, admired them, and feared them. In the Hebrew Bible, Tyre is mentioned again and again, sometimes as an ally, sometimes as a symbol of pride and wealth doomed to fall. The prophet Ezekiel devoted an entire chapter to a lamentation over Tyre, describing its riches and its trade networks in such detail that scholars still use his words to reconstruct the economy of the ancient Mediterranean. The Greeks called the Phoenicians by a name derived from the word for purple, phoenix, the color that Tyre made famous. To the rest of the ancient world, Tyre was synonymous with luxury, with craftsmanship, with the mysteries of the distant sea. Imagine now that you are standing on the docks of the Sidonian harbor in the early morning. The sun has just broken the horizon, and the water is turning from black to deep blue, shot through with veins of gold where the light catches the surface. The harbor is already alive with activity. Wooden piers extend out into the water, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Tied to these piers are ships of every size and description. There are small fishing boats with patched sails, their hulls stained dark by tar and seawater. There are coastal traders, sturdy vessels built to carry amphorae of wine and oil to nearby ports. And there are the great merchant galleys, the pride of the Tyrian fleet, sleek and powerful ships capable of crossing the open Mediterranean to the Pillars of Hercules and beyond. The air is thick with smells. There is the sharp tang of salt and seaweed, the earthy scent of wet rope and tarred wood. There is the smell of fish, both fresh and drying in the sun. There is the acrid, almost chemical odor of the dye works, where the famous Tyrian purple is being extracted from mountains of crushed murex shells. And there is the perfume of the east, the scent of cedar and frankincense and myrrh carried on the morning breeze from the warehouses where the most valuable goods are stored. If you walk along the docks, you will hear a dozen languages being spoken at once. There are Phoenician sailors shouting orders to each other as they prepare to cast off. There are Egyptian merchants haggling over the price of linen and grain. There are Greeks examining bolts of purple-dyed cloth with the practiced eye of men who know its value. There are Hebrews from the kingdom of Israel come to buy glass and metal work. There are even men from the distant west, from the Tin Islands beyond the sunset, speaking in tongues that no one in Tyre can fully understand. The work of the harbor never truly stops. Even now, in the early dawn, ships are being loaded and unloaded. Gangs of laborers, their backs bent under the weight of amphorae and crates, move in steady rhythms up and down the gangplanks. Overseers call out tallies and instructions. Scribes sit at small tables under awnings, recording transactions on wax tablets and sheets of papyrus. The sound of hammering echoes from the shipyards, where new vessels are being constructed and old ones repaired. Carpenters are shaping timber into ribs and planks. Caulkers are sealing the seams with pitch. Sailmakers are stitching heavy linen into the great square sails that will catch the wind and carry these ships to the ends of the earth. This is the heartbeat of Tyre. This is where the wealth of nations flows in and out with the tide. This is where a city with no farmland and no natural resources became richer than kingdoms 10 times its size. The people you see moving through the harbor represent every level of Tyrian society. At the bottom are the slaves, men and women captured in war or sold into bondage to pay debts, laboring in the dye works and the warehouses. Above them are the free laborers, dock workers and sailors who own nothing but their strength and their skill. Then come the craftsmen, the shipwrights and glassmakers and weavers, men who have learned trades passed down through generations. Higher still are the ship captains and the minor merchants, men of modest wealth who own a single vessel or a small share in a trading expedition. And at the very top are the merchant princes, the great families of Tyre who own entire fleets, who have trading partnerships in every major port of the Mediterranean, who lend money to kings and finance the founding of colonies. These men live in magnificent houses built of cedar and stone, decorated with ivory and gold. They dine on imported delicacies and dress in robes of the finest purple. They wield more real power than many monarchs, and yet for all their wealth, they are still merchants. They still understand that their fortunes rise and fall with the sea. To truly understand Tyre, you must understand the source of its greatest wealth, the secret that made it famous across the ancient world. You must understand the murex snail and the color it produced. The Tyrian purple was not merely a dye, it was a symbol of power, a mark of divinity, a color reserved for emperors and gods. In the ancient Mediterranean, purple cloth was worth more than its weight in gold. A single pound of wool dyed in true Tyrian purple could cost the equivalent of a year's wages for a skilled laborer. Only the wealthiest and most powerful could afford it. To wear purple was to announce to the world that you stood above ordinary mortals. Roman emperors would later make it illegal for anyone but the emperor himself to wear the deepest shade of purple. To violate this law was treason, punishable by death. And all of this extraordinary value flowed from the work being done right now in the malodorous dye works on the edge of the city. The process of making Tyrian purple was labor-intensive, time-consuming, and deeply unpleasant. It began with the harvest of murex snails from the shallow waters along the coast. These were small sea creatures, no bigger than your fist, with beautiful spiraled shells. Thousands upon thousands of them had to be collected. Once gathered, the snails were cracked open, and a tiny gland, no larger than a grain of rice, was carefully extracted. This gland contained the precious substance. The glands were then placed in large vats and left to ferment for days under the hot Mediterranean sun. The smell that rose from these vats was reportedly so foul that the dye works were always located on the outskirts of the city, downwind if possible. Ancient writers compared the stench to rotting fish mixed with human waste, a smell so powerful it could be detected from a great distance. But from this putrid brew came magic. When wool or linen was immersed in the fermented liquid and then exposed to sunlight, it would gradually transform. First it would turn yellowish, then greenish, then it would shift through shades of blue and violet. And finally, after careful treatment and repeated dyeing, it would achieve the deep, rich, shimmering purple that made Tyre famous, a color that did not fade with time or washing, a color that seemed to glow with an inner light. The control of this dye was one of the foundations of Tyre's wealth. The Phoenicians guarded the secrets of the process carefully. They established dye works in their colonies across the Mediterranean. But the finest purple, the most expensive and most coveted, always came from Tyre itself. The demand was insatiable. Every king, every temple, every wealthy household in the ancient world wanted Tyrian purple, and Tyre was happy to supply it. At a price, the mountains of crushed murex shells that accumulated around the dye works grew so large that they became permanent features of the landscape. Archaeologists excavating ancient Tyre have found these shell heaps, layer upon layer of discarded snails, silent testimony to centuries of production. It has been estimated that it took approximately 12,000 snails to produce enough dye for a single gram of pure purple. The scale of the industry was staggering, and the profits were enormous. But Tyre was more than just a factory for purple dye. It was a hub of craftsmanship and innovation. The Phoenicians were master shipbuilders. Their vessels were renowned throughout the ancient world for their speed, their seaworthiness, and their beauty. A Tyrian ship was built to last, constructed from the finest cedar wood brought down from the mountains of Lebanon. The hull was carefully shaped, the planks fitted together with precision and sealed with pitch. The sails were woven from the strongest linen, often dyed in bright colors to identify the ship's owner or home port. The rigging was made from rope so well crafted that it could withstand the fury of storms that would tear apart lesser vessels. Phoenician ships were not the largest in the ancient world, but they were among the most reliable. They could sail in almost any weather. They could navigate by the stars when out of sight of land. They could beach themselves on sandy shores to trade with coastal villages that had no proper harbors, and they could, when necessary, be rowed by disciplined crews of oarsmen, making them independent of the wind. The Phoenicians were also master glassmakers. They did not invent glass, but they perfected techniques for producing it in large quantities and shaping it into beautiful and useful objects. Tyrian glass was famous for its clarity and its color. Artisans learned how to add different minerals to the molten glass to create deep blues, brilliant greens, and rich ambers. They crafted delicate vessels, jewelry, and decorative objects that were traded across the Mediterranean. Some scholars believe that the Phoenicians discovered the art of glass blowing, though this is debated. What is certain is that glass from Tyre was highly prized, and the techniques developed in Phoenician workshops would eventually spread throughout the ancient world, influencing Roman and Islamic glass-making traditions centuries later. And then there was the alphabet. The Phoenicians did not invent writing, but they invented something perhaps more important. They invented a simple, efficient system of writing that could be learned quickly and used by anyone, not just trained scribes. Earlier writing systems like Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform were complex and required years of study to master. The Phoenician alphabet was different. It consisted of just 22 symbols, each representing a single consonant sound. There were no symbols for vowels in the original system, but even so, it was revolutionary. A merchant could learn to read and write in a matter of weeks, not years. Contracts could be recorded, inventories could be kept. Messages could be sent across great distances. The Phoenician alphabet spread wherever Phoenician traders went. The Greeks adopted it and added vowels, creating the ancestor of the alphabet you are reading right now. The Hebrews adapted it for their own language. The Arameans took it east. Eventually, through a long chain of transmission and adaptation, the Phoenician alphabet would give rise to most of the writing systems used in Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia today. It is one of humanity's most important inventions, and it was created, or at least perfected, by merchants who needed a practical tool for keeping track of their business. Now imagine you are walking inland from the harbor, up the narrow streets that wind through the heart of the city. The streets of Tyre are not wide. Space on the island is precious, and every square foot is used. The buildings rise 3 or 4 stories high, built of stone and cedar, their walls whitewashed against the sun. The upper floors overhang the street, creating shaded passages where the midday heat is less oppressive. The streets themselves are paved with flat stones, worn smooth by countless footsteps. In the center of many streets runs a shallow channel where rainwater and waste flow down toward the sea. The smell here is different from the harbor. There is less salt in the air, more smoke from cooking fires, more spices from the market stalls, more humanity packed into a small space. You pass workshops where craftsmen are at work. Through one open door you can see a metalsmith hammering a sheet of bronze into the shape of a bowl. Through another, weavers are working at their looms, the rhythmic clack of the shuttle a steady background music to the life of the city. You pass a bakery where flat bread is being pulled from a clay oven, the smell of baking dough mingling with the ever-present scent of the sea. You pass a tavern where merchants are conducting business over cups of wine, their voices raised in negotiation, in laughter, in argument. Everywhere there are people. Tyre is crowded. It is noisy. It is alive with the energy of commerce and craft. At the center of the island, the streets open up into a larger square, and here, rising above all the other buildings, is the Temple of Melkart. This is the heart of Tyre, the spiritual center of the city. Melkart is the god of Tyre, the divine protector of sailors and merchants, the lord of the city. His temple is one of the most sacred places in the Phoenician world. It is a massive structure, built of stone and cedar, its columns rising high into the air, its walls decorated with carvings and inlaid with precious materials. The entrance is flanked by 2 enormous pillars, standing free like sentinels. These pillars are famous. Later, Greek travelers will hear stories of them and will associate them with the mythical pillars of Hercules that mark the edge of the known world. But here, in Tyre, they are symbols of Melkart's power, markers of his domain. Inside the temple, the air is thick with the smoke of incense. Priests in white robes move through the dim interior, performing rituals that have been performed in this place for centuries. There is an altar where sacrifices are made, animals offered to the god in exchange for his favor and protection. There is a sacred flame that is never allowed to go out, tended day and night by dedicated servants of the temple. And there is a Holy of Holies, an inner sanctum where only the high priest is permitted to enter, where the most sacred objects of the cult are kept hidden from the eyes of the uninitiated. The temple is not just a place of worship, it is also a place of power. The priests of Melkart are wealthy and influential. They own land. They collect tithes and offerings. They advise the rulers of the city. Religion and politics and commerce are all intertwined here, as they are throughout the ancient world. To honor Melkart is to honor Tyre. To pray for his blessing is to pray for the success of the next trading voyage, for the safety of the ships at sea, for the prosperity of the city. The political structure of Tyre is complex, and it changes over the centuries. At various times the city is ruled by kings. At other times it is governed by a council of wealthy merchants and elders. But regardless of the specific form of government, real power in Tyre always rests with the same people, the great merchant families who own the ships and control the trade. These are not democratic institutions in any modern sense. The common people, the laborers and craftsmen and sailors have little voice in how the city is run. But neither is Tyre a typical ancient tyranny. The rulers of the city, even the kings, understand that their power depends on prosperity, and prosperity depends on trade, and trade depends on peace, or at least on carefully managed conflict. The merchant princes of Tyre are pragmatists. They will fight when they must. They will resist conquest, but they prefer negotiation to war, and they are willing to pay tribute to powerful neighbors if it means keeping the trade routes open. This pragmatism serves Tyre well. Throughout its long history, the city is repeatedly threatened by the great land empires of the Near East: the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. Each of these powers, in turn, casts its shadow over the Phoenician coast. Each demands submission. Each expects tribute, and Tyre, again and again, bends just enough to survive. It pays gold when gold is demanded. It sends ships to serve in foreign fleets. When ships are required, it offers diplomatic gifts and marriage alliances, but it never fully surrenders its independence. The island fortress is too strong. The harbors are too well defended, and the great empires focused on their vast continental domains are never quite willing to pay the price in blood and treasure that conquering Tyre would require. So the city endures. It survives. It prospers. It outlasts kingdoms and dynasties. It becomes a constant in a changing world. The wealth that flows through Tyre does not stay locked in the vaults of the merchant princes. It spills out into the life of the city in 1,000 ways. It pays for the construction of magnificent buildings, not just temples but also palaces and public works. It funds festivals and religious ceremonies. It supports a thriving community of artisans and craftsmen. It even in its own way provides for the poor. Tyrian merchants understand the importance of reputation. A merchant who is known to be generous, who gives to the temples, who provides for the needy in times of hardship, earns respect and loyalty. This loyalty can be valuable. It can mean preferential treatment in business dealings. It can mean political support. It can mean that when times are hard, the people of the city will rally to defend their home rather than opening the gates to an invader. So the wealthy give, not always generously, not always willingly, but they give. The city is also a place of learning and culture. Phoenician scribes preserve ancient texts. Phoenician scholars study the stars and the movements of the planets, knowledge that is essential for navigation. Phoenician priests maintain religious traditions that stretch back into the mists of prehistory, and Phoenician travelers bring back stories and ideas from every corner of the Mediterranean. This is not a culture that builds great libraries or philosophical schools in the manner of the later Greeks, but it is a culture that is curious, practical, and adaptable. It takes what is useful from other peoples and makes it their own. Egyptian techniques for working with gold, Mesopotamian methods of accounting, Greek styles of pottery. Tyrian culture is a fusion, a cosmopolitan mix that reflects the city's role as a crossroads of the ancient world. As the day wears on, and the sun begins to descend toward the western horizon, the activity in the harbor shifts. Ships that were being loaded in the morning are now casting off, their sails unfurling, their crews calling out farewells to those left behind. Other ships, returning from voyages, are carefully navigating the narrow entrance to the harbor, their captains watching for the signal fires and the marker buoys that guide them safely past the hidden reefs. As evening falls, the work slows. The laborers drift away from the docks. The merchants close their account books and retire to their homes. The taverns fill with sailors and travelers, men sharing stories of distant ports and dangerous seas. The smell of cooking fires drifts through the streets. Somewhere, a street musician is playing a flute, the melody haunting and minor, a sound that seems to belong to the sea itself. Night in Tyre is quieter than the day, but it is not silent. The watch patrols the walls and the harbors, calling out the hours and scanning the dark water for any sign of danger. The sacred flame in the temple of Melkar continues to burn, tended by sleepy priests. In the wealthier homes, oil lamps cast flickering light on painted walls and tiled floors. Families gather for the evening meal. Children are put to bed, and in the taverns and the brothels, the night's entertainments are just beginning. Tyre is a port city. It is a place where sailors come ashore after weeks at sea, hungry for wine and food and companionship. It is a place where strangers meet and fortunes change hands. It is a place of danger and opportunity, of sin and salvation, of the sacred and the profane all mixed together. And if you stand on the walls of the city and look out over the dark water, you can see, far in the distance, the lights of other ships, tiny flickering points in the vast emptiness of the sea. Those lights represent the lifeblood of Tyre. Each one is a ship on a journey, carrying goods and people and ideas from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. Each one is a thread in the vast web of trade that connects the ancient world. And Tyre sits at the center of that web, a spider spinning connections, growing fat on the wealth that flows through its harbors. This is the golden age of the city. This is Tyre at the height of its power. But even at the height, there are shadows. There are threats on the horizon. There are powers rising that will, in time, challenge the supremacy of the island fortress. But for now, for this moment, Tyre is unconquerable. It is eternal. It is the queen of the sea. To understand the true reach of Tyre's power, you must leave the city itself and follow one of its ships on a voyage across the Mediterranean. Imagine now that you are aboard a Phoenician merchant galley, a vessel built in the shipyards of Tyre and captained by a man who has spent his entire life on the sea. The ship is perhaps 80 feet long, with a rounded hull designed to carry cargo. There is a single square sail made of heavy linen, dyed a deep red to identify it as a Tyrian vessel. Below deck, there are benches for rowers, though the crew will rely on the sail whenever the wind is favorable. Rowing is hard work, and it is reserved for calms or for navigating into and out of harbors where precision is required. The ship's hold is packed with goods for trade. There are amphorae filled with wine and oil. There are bundles of purple-dyed wool. There are ingots of copper and tin. There are small sealed jars containing precious perfumes and cosmetics. And there is always some space left for whatever valuable cargo can be acquired along the way. The captain is an experienced navigator. He has made this voyage dozens of times. He knows every current, every seasonal wind, every safe anchorage along the route. He navigates by landmarks when close to shore, by the position of the sun during the day, and by the stars at night. The Phoenicians are among the first peoples to use the North Star for navigation, a technique that will eventually spread to other seafaring cultures. But even with all this knowledge, sailing in the ancient world is dangerous. Storms can blow up with little warning. Pirates prowl the shipping lanes. Hostile ports can refuse entry or demand exorbitant fees. Every voyage is a gamble, and yet the potential profits are so great that men are willing to take the risk again and again. The ship leaves Tyre in the early morning, when the wind is usually favorable. The crew casts off the mooring lines and pushes away from the dock with long poles. Once clear of the harbor, the sail is unfurled, and the wind fills it with a sound like a crack of thunder. The ship heels slightly and begins to move, cutting through the blue water with a hiss and a gurgle. Behind you, the city of Tyre grows smaller, the white buildings and the high walls and the columns of the temple shrinking until they are just a smudge on the horizon. Ahead lies the open sea, vast and empty and full of promise. The first leg of the journey might take the ship north along the Phoenician coast, past the sister cities of Sidon and Byblos and Arwad. These are cities much like Tyre, though none quite as powerful or as wealthy. The coast here is rugged, a line of mountains descending steeply to the sea. In the interior, beyond those mountains, lies the great cedars of Lebanon, the source of the timber that builds these ships. Phoenician traders have been cutting and transporting cedar for thousands of years. The Egyptians prized it for their temples and their ships. The Assyrians demanded it as tribute, and the Tyrians used it for everything from shipbuilding to the construction of palaces. The trade in cedar is one of the oldest and most important in the region, a constant thread running through the history of the Levant. After several days of sailing, The ship might turn west, heading out across the open Mediterranean toward the island of Cyprus. This is a wealthy and important island, rich in copper, and the Phoenicians have established settlements and trading posts along its southern coast. The crossing takes perhaps 2 or 3 days, depending on the wind. For much of this time there is no land in sight, just the endless expanse of water and sky. The crew settles into a rhythm. The sailors take turns at the steering oar, keeping the ship on course. Others tend to the sail, adjusting the rigging to catch the best angle of the wind. Meals are simple: bread and dried fish and onions, washed down with watered wine. At night the ship does not anchor. There is no bottom to reach in the deep water. Instead, the sail is reefed and the ship drifts, the crew taking turns on watch, scanning the darkness for any sign of danger or for the lights of other vessels. From Cyprus, the journey might continue west to the island of Crete, and from there to the Greek mainland or to the islands of the Aegean. Or it might turn south toward Egypt, toward the great port of Alexandria or the older harbors of the Nile Delta. Or it might head west and south toward the coast of North Africa, where Phoenician colonies are scattered like pearls on a string. The greatest of these colonies is Carthage, founded by settlers from Tyre sometime in the 9th or 8th century before the Common Era. Carthage will grow to become a mighty power in its own right, eventually challenging Rome itself for control of the western Mediterranean. But in the early days it is simply another Tyrian outpost, a place where ships can resupply and trade, a foothold in a distant land. The longest and most ambitious voyages take Phoenician ships far beyond the familiar waters of the eastern Mediterranean. Some sail west past Sicily and Sardinia, past the southern coast of Spain, and through the narrow strait that the Greeks will later call the Pillars of Hercules. Beyond these pillars lies the Atlantic Ocean, a cold and forbidding sea that the Mediterranean peoples regard with a mixture of awe and terror. But the Phoenicians are not afraid. They established trading posts along the Atlantic coast of Spain and Morocco. They sail north to the Tin Islands, which may be the coast of Britain or perhaps the islands off the coast of Brittany, places where tin essential for making bronze can be obtained. Some ancient sources even claim that Phoenician ships circumnavigated the entire continent of Africa, sailing south from the Red Sea around the Cape of Good Hope and returning through the Pillars of Hercules. The Greek historian Herodotus reports this story, but expresses doubt about its accuracy. Modern scholars debate whether such a voyage was truly possible with ancient technology. But whether the story is true or not, it reflects the reputation the Phoenicians had earned as the greatest sailors of the ancient world, men who would go anywhere and risk anything in pursuit of profit. Life aboard these ships is hard. The crew sleeps on deck or in the cramped space below, huddled together for warmth on cold nights. There are no private quarters, no comforts. The food is monotonous and often spoiled. Fresh water is precious and must be rationed carefully. Storms are a constant threat. The wooden hull creaks and groans under the assault of the waves. Water pours in through every seam, and the crew must bail constantly to keep the ship afloat. Men are swept overboard and lost. Ships run aground on hidden rocks and are smashed to pieces. Entire cargoes are lost. And yet when a ship returns safely to Tyre, when the hold is emptied and the profits are tallied, the rewards can be enormous. A single successful voyage can make a man wealthy. A lifetime of successful voyages can make him one of the merchant princes who rule the city. The sailors themselves are a breed apart. They are tough, superstitious, and fiercely loyal to their captain and their ship. They offer prayers and sacrifices to Melkart and to the other gods of the sea before every voyage. They carry amulets and charms to ward off evil. They tell stories of sea monsters and mermaids, of islands that appear and disappear, of strange peoples and unimaginable wonders. These stories are not just entertainment. They are a way of making sense of a world that is vast and dangerous and full of mystery. They are a way of coping with fear, and they are a way of preserving knowledge, of passing down from one generation to the next, the hard-won wisdom of those who have sailed these waters before. When the ship finally returns to Tyre, when the familiar outline of the city appears on the horizon, there is a sense of relief and joy among the crew. They have survived. They have completed their journey. They are home. As the ship enters the harbor, the captain makes an offering at the shrine near the entrance, thanking the gods for their safe return. The cargo is unloaded and inspected. The profits are calculated and distributed. The crew is paid. And after a few days or weeks of rest, after the ship has been repaired and resupplied, the whole process begins again. This is the rhythm of life for the sailors of Tyre. This is how a small island with no natural resources becomes the hub of a maritime empire. This is how Tyre earns its wealth and its fame. But wealth attracts envy, power attracts challenges, and throughout its long history, Tyre is never far from danger. The greatest threats come from the land, from the vast empires that rise and fall in Mesopotamia and Egypt. These empires view the Phoenician coast as a strategic prize. Control of the coastal cities means control of the maritime trade routes. It means access to the wealth of the sea. It means the ability to project power across the Mediterranean. And so, one after another, the great kings of the East march their armies to the shore and demand that Tyre submit. The first great challenge comes from Assyria. The Assyrian Empire, centered in what is now northern Iraq, is one of the most powerful and aggressive states of the ancient world. The Assyrians are famous for their military prowess and their brutal methods of warfare. They have conquered vast territories, from the mountains of Armenia to the deserts of Arabia, and in the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era, they turn their attention to the west. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser Vap lays siege to the mainland suburbs of Tyre around 720 before the Common Era, but the island itself, protected by the sea, holds out. The Assyrians have no navy capable of challenging the Phoenician ships. They can ravage the countryside. They can cut off land trade routes, but they cannot take the island. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Tyre agrees to pay tribute, enormous sums of gold and silver in exchange for being left alone. It is a humiliating arrangement, but it preserves the city's autonomy. The pattern repeats under other Assyrian kings. Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, Ashurbanipal. Each in turn marches to the coast and demands submission. Each receives tribute. But none can conquer the island. The sea is Tyre's shield. The harbors are its fortress. And the wealth generated by trade is enough to buy off even the mightiest empire. This arrangement lasts for more than a century. Tyre remains nominally subject to Assyria, but in practice it governs itself. The ships continue to sail. The trade continues to flow. The city continues to prosper. It is a delicate balance, a constant negotiation between independence and submission, but it works. But then comes a threat that is even greater, an enemy even more persistent. In the late 7th century, before the Common Era, the Assyrian Empire begins to collapse. Internal strife, rebellions, and invasions weaken it from within. The Babylonians, led by the great king Nebuchadnezzar II, rise to take their place. Nebuchadnezzar is one of the most famous rulers of the ancient world. He is the king who will conquer Jerusalem and carry the Hebrews into exile. He is the builder of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the wonders of the ancient world. And he is a conqueror of relentless ambition. After securing control of Mesopotamia, he turns his attention to the west. He marches down the coast of the Levant, conquering city after city. And in the year 585 before the Common Era, he arrives at Tyre. What follows is one of the longest sieges in ancient history. For 13 years, the armies of Babylon camp outside the walls of Tyre. 13 years. It is an almost unimaginable length of time for a siege to last. The Babylonians occupy the mainland. They destroy the suburbs and the farmland. They cut down the forests and tear up the orchards. They build siege works and fortifications. They hurl insults and threats at the defenders on the island. And they wait. They wait for hunger to break the will of the Tyrians. They wait for disease to ravage the population. They wait for internal dissent to open the gates from within. But none of these things happen. Tyre does not fall. The secret to Tyre's survival is simple. As long as the city controls the sea, it cannot be starved into submission. Ships continue to bring food and supplies into the harbors. The Babylonians, a land-based empire, have no navy capable of blockading the island. They can watch from the shore as Phoenician vessels sail in and out, but they are powerless to stop them. The people of Tyre suffer, certainly. 13 years of siege is a long and terrible ordeal. The population is confined to the island, unable to tend the fields and orchards on the mainland. Prices rise as supplies become scarce. There are shortages and hardships, but the city does not starve. The merchants continue to trade. The ships continue to sail, and the walls continue to stand. Inside the city, life goes on in a strange, suspended state. Imagine living through those 13 years. The first few months, perhaps, there is a sense of defiance, even excitement. The enemy is at the gates, but the walls are strong and the sea is on your side. There is confidence that Nebuchadnezzar will eventually give up and leave, as other conquerors have done before. But as the months turn into years, the mood changes. The initial defiance gives way to a grinding, weary endurance. Every day is the same. The enemy is still there, camped on the mainland, a constant reminder that the world beyond the island is closed off. Families who owned farms and estates on the shore have lost everything. The fishing boats that once ranged up and down the coast now stay close to the island, wary of Babylonian patrols. The great merchant voyages continue, but they are fewer and more dangerous. Pirates, sensing weakness, become bolder. Rival cities try to take advantage of Tyre's distraction to poach its trade. Inside the walls, the government works to maintain order and morale. Rations are imposed to ensure that supplies are distributed fairly. The temples hold special ceremonies and sacrifices, calling on Melkart and the other gods to deliver the city from its enemies. The wealthy merchant families, who might otherwise be tempted to negotiate a separate peace to protect their own interests, are kept in line by a mixture of patriotism, pride, and fear. To surrender would mean losing everything. To hold out offers at least the hope of eventual relief, and so the city holds, year after year after year. The psychological toll of such a siege is immense. Imagine the slow erosion of hope. Imagine watching your children grow up, knowing nothing but the walls of the island and the sight of the enemy across the water. Imagine the constant, gnawing anxiety that this will be the day the Babylonians find a way to cross the channel, the day the walls are breached, the day the city falls. And yet somehow the people of Tyre endure. They endure because they have no choice. They endure because surrender would mean death or slavery. They endure because the sea is their fortress and their faith. Finally, after 13 long years, the siege comes to an end. The exact details are murky. The historical sources are fragmentary and sometimes contradictory. What seems clear is that Nebuchadnezzar, frustrated by his inability to take the city by force, eventually agrees to a negotiated settlement. Tyre acknowledges Babylonian overlordship and agrees to pay tribute. In return, Nebuchadnezzar lifts the siege and withdraws his army. It is not a total victory for either side. Tyre has not been conquered, its walls have not been breached, its people have not been enslaved, but it has been weakened. 13 years of siege have drained its resources and damaged its prestige. The city survives, but it is a changed city, humbled and wary. In the aftermath of the Babylonian siege, Tyre slowly rebuilds. The mainland suburbs are reoccupied. The trade routes are re-established. The ships begin to sail again in greater numbers, but the memory of those 13 years lingers. It is a reminder of vulnerability, a warning that even the greatest city can be brought low, and it sets the stage for the next great challenge, a challenge that will come from a direction no one expects. As the 6th century before the Common Era gives way to the 5th, the political landscape of the Near East shifts once again. The Babylonian Empire falls to the Persians, a new power rising from the highlands of what is now Iran. The Persian Empire, under kings like Cyrus and Darius, becomes the largest empire the world has yet seen, stretching from the borders of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. The Phoenician cities, including Tyre, are incorporated into this vast realm. But the Persians are pragmatic rulers. They do not try to suppress the local cultures or religions of their subjects. As long as tribute is paid and loyalty is maintained, they allow a great deal of autonomy. For Tyre, this is an acceptable arrangement. The Persian kings value the Phoenician fleets and use them in their wars against the Greeks. Phoenician ships serve in the great naval battles of the Persian wars, fighting at Salamis and other engagements. It is not always a glorious role. The Greeks, of course, view the Phoenicians as barbarians and enemies, but for the Tyrians it is simply business. They serve the Persian king because he is the dominant power, and serving him allows them to continue trading and prospering. This period of Persian dominance lasts for about 2 centuries. It is a time of relative peace and prosperity for Tyre. The city is no longer an independent power in the way it once was, but it is wealthy and secure. The harbors are full of ships. The warehouses are stocked with goods from every corner of the known world. The temples are rich with offerings, and the merchant princes live in a luxury that rivals the courts of kings. It is a golden age, or at least a silver one. but it is also a time of complacency. The Tyrians have grown used to their island fortress. They have come to believe that the sea will always protect them, that no enemy can ever truly conquer them. This belief is about to be put to the ultimate test. In the year 336 before the Common Era, a young Macedonian king named Alexander crosses into Asia at the head of an army. Alexander is 20 years old, brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He has already conquered Greece. Now he sets out to conquer the Persian Empire. He sweeps down the coast of Asia Minor, winning battle after battle. The Persian armies cannot stand against his disciplined phalanxes and his tactical genius. City after city opens its gates to him, either out of fear or in hope of gaining favor with the new master of the world. By the year 332, Alexander has reached the Phoenician coast. The cities of Byblos and Sidon submit without resistance. But when Alexander's envoys arrive at Tyre, they receive a different answer. The Tyrians are willing to acknowledge Alexander as the successor to the Persian king. They are willing to send him gifts and tribute, but they refuse to allow him or his army to enter the city. They cite their policy of neutrality. They offer friendship but not submission. It is a careful, calculated response, the kind of diplomatic balancing act that Tyre practiced for centuries. But Alexander is not a man who accepts half measures. He does not want tribute. He wants total control. He wants to garrison his troops in the city. He wants to make an offering at the Temple of Melkort, a symbolic act that would demonstrate his dominance. And when the Tyrians refuse, he decides that Tyre must be made an example. It must be destroyed. The problem, of course, is that Alexander has no fleet. His army is formidable on land, but the island of Tyre, lying half a mile offshore, might as well be on the moon. Alexander's generals expect that he will simply bypass the city and continue his march south toward Egypt. After all, Tyre is not a strategic threat as long as it remains neutral. But Alexander refuses. He has never left an enemy unconquered behind him. He will not start now, and so he announces a plan that seems insane, a plan that no one believes is possible. He will build a causeway from the mainland to the island. He will turn the island into a peninsula, and then he will storm the city. The construction of the causeway begins almost immediately. Alexander orders his engineers to survey the channel between the shore and the island. It is about half a mile wide, and in places, 18 feet deep. The bottom is mud and rock. The current is strong. Building a solid roadway across this expanse will require an enormous amount of material and labor. Alexander does not care. He has the ruins of the old mainland city of Tyre to draw on. His soldiers begin tearing down buildings and using the stone and timber to build the causeway. Trees are cut down and dragged to the shore. Rocks are quarried. Everything is thrown into the water to create a foundation. Slowly, painfully, the causeway begins to extend out from the shore toward the island. At first, the Tyrians watch this effort with amusement. They cannot believe that Alexander is serious. The sea will wash away his causeway. Storms will scatter his materials. The whole project is doomed to fail. They jeer at the workers from the walls. They send out small boats to harass the construction crews. But as the weeks pass and the causeway continues to grow, the mood in the city begins to change. The Tyrians realize that Alexander is not going to give up. They begin to take the threat seriously. They mount their own counterattacks. Tyrian ships sail out and shoot arrows and hurl javelins at the workers on the causeway. They send fire ships, vessels loaded with pitch and sulfur, and set ablaze to crash into the wooden structures and burn them. These attacks are effective. They slow the work. They kill and wound Alexander's soldiers, but they do not stop the project. Alexander responds by building 2 massive siege towers on the causeway itself, tall wooden structures from which his archers and catapults can provide covering fire for the workers. The Tyrians respond by raising the height of their walls facing the causeway, making them even harder to assault. It becomes a grim contest of wills, a race between Alexander's determination and Tyrian ingenuity. Months pass. The causeway grows longer and wider. It is now more than halfway across the channel. The Tyrians realize that they need help. They send desperate messages to Carthage, their greatest colony, begging for ships and reinforcements. But Carthage is far away and embroiled in its own conflicts. No help comes. Alexander, meanwhile, solves his greatest problem. He gathers a fleet. He takes ships from the other Phoenician cities that have submitted to him. He receives ships from the king of Cyprus, who is eager to gain favor with the conqueror. With this fleet, Alexander is able to blockade Tyre's harbors and prevent the Tyrian ships from attacking his causeway. The balance of power shifts decisively. The Tyrians are now trapped on their island, surrounded by enemies, cut off from the sea that has always been their protection. The causeway continues to advance, and then after 7 months of labor, it reaches the island. The final assault on Tyre is a masterpiece of ancient siege warfare. Alexander brings up his siege engines along the causeway. He has catapults that hurl massive stones to batter down the walls. He has battering rams mounted on wheeled platforms, driven forward by crews of soldiers, and he has ships equipped with siege towers and boarding bridges attacking the walls from the sea. The assault is coordinated and relentless. For days the Macedonian forces pound the defenses. The Tyrians fight back with desperate courage. They drop stones and burning materials on the attackers. They use cranes to lift grappling hooks and try to overturn the siege engines. They send divers to cut the anchor ropes of Alexander's ships, but it is not enough. The walls, which have stood for centuries, begin to crumble under the assault. A section of the southern wall near the harbor collapses, and Alexander's troops pour through the breach. What follows is a scene of horror. The Macedonian soldiers, enraged by the long and costly siege, show no mercy. They storm through the streets of Tyre, killing everyone they find. Men, women, children. It makes no difference. The city is put to the sword. Ancient sources claim that 8,000 Tyrians are slaughtered in the final assault. Thousands more, perhaps 30,000, are taken as slaves and sold. The king of Tyre and a group of nobles who have taken refuge in the temple of Melkart are spared, but only because Alexander wants to make his offering at the temple as he had originally planned. The rest of the population is either dead or enslaved. The great city, the unconquerable island, has fallen. Alexander orders the city to be repopulated with settlers loyal to him. The walls are repaired. The harbors are put back into service, but it is not the same city. The ancient Phoenician culture, the merchant families who had ruled for centuries, the traditions and the pride of Tyre, all of this is gone, swept away in the blood and fire of the conquest. The causeway that Alexander built remains. Over time it collects silt and sediment. It widens and becomes permanent. The island of Tyre is no longer an island. It is now a peninsula, connected to the mainland by a strip of land that was forged in the crucible of war. The geography itself has been changed. The unconquerable island has been conquered by being turned into something else. In the centuries that follow, Tyre is rebuilt and continues to function as a city and a port. It passes from the control of Alexander's successors to the Romans. Under Roman rule, it enjoys a measure of prosperity. Roman emperors value the city for its strategic location and its skilled craftsmen. The purple dye industry continues. The glass-making and metalworking traditions persist. Tyre remains an important center of trade, but it is no longer a great power. It is a provincial city in someone else's empire. The days of independence, the days when Tyrian merchant princes could negotiate with kings as equals, are over. Christianity comes to the region in the 1st century of the Common Era. According to the Christian scriptures, Jesus himself visited the region of Tyre and Sidon during his ministry. Early Christian communities are established in the city. Tyre becomes an important center of the early church. It produces bishops and theologians. The temple of Melkart is eventually abandoned and converted or destroyed, replaced by Christian churches. The old gods are forgotten, or at least driven underground. The religious landscape, like the political landscape, has been transformed. The Roman Empire eventually splits into eastern and western halves. Tyre becomes part of the Byzantine Empire, the Greek-speaking Christian continuation of Rome in the east. Under Byzantine rule, the city continues to function as a port and a commercial center, though it is increasingly overshadowed by other cities like Constantinople and Alexandria. The purple dye industry continues, but the monopoly is long gone. Other cities have learned the secrets of murex dye production. The trade routes that once made Tyre wealthy now flow through other ports. The city survives, but it is a shadow of what it once was. In the 7th century, a new power rises in the deserts of Arabia. The armies of Islam sweep out of the peninsula, conquering with astonishing speed. Within a few decades, they have taken Syria, Egypt, Persia, and North Africa. Tyre falls to the Muslim conquerors in the year 638. The city is absorbed into the growing Islamic empire. The Christian population is allowed to remain, but they become a minority, subject to special taxes and restrictions. The city's importance continues to decline. It is no longer a major center of anything. It is simply another port on a coast that is full of ports. The Crusades bring a brief return to prominence. In the year 1124, Christian knights from Europe fighting to establish and maintain Crusader kingdoms in the Holy Land capture Tyre after a long siege. For nearly 2 centuries, Tyre is part of the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. It is fortified and defended as a key stronghold, but the Crusader presence in the region is never secure. They are surrounded by hostile Muslim powers, and in the year 1291, the city falls once again, this time to the Mamluks of Egypt. The Crusaders are expelled. The fortifications are torn down to prevent the city from being used as a base by future invaders. Tyre is deliberately reduced to a minor town, stripped of its walls and much of its population. For the next several centuries, Tyre is a quiet, unimportant place. It is part of the Ottoman Empire. Fishermen live in the ruins of the ancient city. Farmers tend small fields on the causeway that Alexander built. Travelers occasionally stop to marvel at the scattered columns and the remnants of the old walls, but there is little to see. The great harbors are silted up and unusable. The palaces and temples are gone, their stones carried away and reused in other buildings. Nature slowly reclaims what humanity built. Vines grow over the ruins. Sand drifts into the streets. The sea, which once brought wealth and power to this place, now laps quietly at the empty shore. It is only in the 19th and 20th centuries, with the rise of archaeology as a scientific discipline, that the world begins to rediscover ancient Tyre. Archaeologists excavate the ruins. They uncover the remains of temples and theaters and public buildings. They find the vast accumulations of murex shells, evidence of the purple dye industry. They map the ancient harbors and study the causeway. They piece together, from fragments of stone and pottery and written records, the story of the city that once ruled the sea. The modern city of Surbas, as Tyre is now called, is built on and around the ancient ruins. It is a modestly sized town in southern Lebanon, home to a few tens of thousands of people. The economy is based on fishing, agriculture, and some tourism. Visitors can walk through the archaeological sites, can see the Roman hippodrome and the scattered columns, can stand on the shore and look out at the water and imagine what it must have been like when hundreds of ships filled these harbors, when the air was thick with the smell of dye and incense, when this was the center of the world. The harbors themselves are barely recognizable. The causeway that Alexander built has indeed become permanent, widened by centuries of sedimentation until it is now a substantial isthmus connecting the old island to the mainland. Where once there was open water, there is now solid ground covered with buildings and roads. The northern and southern harbors, which once sheltered the great fleets, are small, shallow basins used by local fishing boats. The sea has retreated. The silt has advanced. The physical geography has changed so much that it is hard to visualize how the ancient city must have looked. But if you stand in the right place, at the right time of day, you can still feel something of the past. In the early morning, when the light is soft and the modern city is quiet, you can look out over the Mediterranean and imagine the purple sails of the Phoenician ships. You can picture the merchant galleys setting out on voyages to the ends of the earth. You can hear in your mind the calls of the sailors, the creak of the rigging, the splash of the oars. You can imagine the docks crowded with workers, the streets filled with merchants speaking a dozen different languages, the temple rising above the city like a mountain. It is all gone now, swept away by time and war and the slow, patient work of the sea. But the memory remains, the story remains, and the legacy of Tyre, the legacy of the Phoenicians who built it, endures in ways that are both visible and invisible. The legacy is visible in the alphabet you are reading right now, a direct descendant of the script invented by Phoenician merchants. It is visible in the ruins that archaeologists continue to study, in the artifacts displayed in museums around the world. It is visible in the place names scattered across the Mediterranean, in the cities that the Phoenicians founded and that still exist today. Carthage may be ruins, but Tunis, built near its site, is a living city. Cadiz in Spain, ancient Gades, is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe, and it is visible in the techniques and technologies that the Phoenicians pioneered. The art of glassmaking, the methods of navigation, the principles of maritime trade. All of these things spread from the Phoenician cities to the wider world and became part of the common heritage of Mediterranean civilization. The legacy is also invisible, woven into the fabric of history in ways that are hard to measure, but impossible to deny. The Phoenicians were among the first people to think of the sea not as a barrier but as a highway. They were among the first to establish regular long-distance trade routes. They were among the first to found colonies in distant lands, creating networks of connected communities that spanned continents. They pioneered the idea that commerce could be a source of power as great as conquest, that wealth generated by trade could rival the wealth extracted by empires. These ideas, these innovations, these ways of thinking about the world, spread and evolved and eventually became foundational to the development of Western civilization. The Phoenicians, and Tyre above all, played a role in shaping the world we live in today. There is something deeply poignant about the fate of Tyre. It was a city that survived for more than 2,000 years. It endured sieges and invasions and disasters. It adapted to changing political landscapes. It outlasted empires. And yet, in the end it fell. The causeway that Alexander built, the causeway that seemed like a temporary expedient of war, became permanent. The island became a peninsula. The thing that made Tyre special, the thing that made it unconquerable, was taken away. And once that was gone, the city was just another city. It could be conquered. It could be destroyed. It could be forgotten. The sea, which had been Tyre's shield and its fortune, could no longer protect it. But perhaps there is also something hopeful in the story. For all that was lost, for all that was destroyed, Tyre did not disappear entirely. The city still exists. People still live there. The sea still laps at the shore. And the story of what Tyre once was, the story of the merchant princes and the purple sails and the great voyages, that story has not been forgotten. It has been passed down through the ages, preserved in the writings of ancient historians, in the verses of prophets and poets, in the stones uncovered by archaeologists. We remember Tyre. We remember the Phoenicians. We remember that once, on a small island in the eastern Mediterranean, a people with no natural advantages and no great army built one of the wealthiest and most powerful cities in the world, simply through courage and ingenuity, and an unshakable faith in the sea. As you lie here now, as the modern world fades away and sleep begins to approach, let your mind drift back one last time to the harbor of ancient Tyre. It is early evening. The sun is setting over the western sea, painting the water with gold and crimson. The ships are returning to port, their sails furled, their crews weary but satisfied. The smell of cooking fires drifts through the streets. The sound of laughter and music floats out from the taverns. The temple of Melkart stands silhouetted against the sky, its columns dark and solid and eternal. This is Tyre at the end of a long day. This is Tyre at the height of its power. This is the city that was. The merchants gather in the great hall to discuss the next voyage. The scribes tally the day's accounts. The sailors tell stories of distant lands. The children play in the streets, unaware that the world they know will one day be gone. And the sea, the eternal sea, rolls on, indifferent to the rise and fall of cities, indifferent to the ambitions of kings and merchants, indifferent to everything except its own deep rhythms. The waves that crash against the shore tonight are the same waves that crashed against this shore 3,000 years ago. The stars that guide the sailors are the same stars that guided their ancestors. The wind that fills the sails is the same wind that has always filled them. These things do not change. Empires rise and fall. Cities are built and destroyed, but the sea remains. And so our journey through the past comes to an end. We have walked the streets of ancient Tyre. We have stood on its docks and boarded its ships. We have witnessed its glory and its fall. We have seen how a small island with nothing but stone and salt water became a power that shaped the ancient world. We have learned the names of its gods and its kings. We have traced the routes of its merchants and the voyages of its sailors. We have felt the spray of the Mediterranean on our faces and heard the cries of gulls and the creak of rigging. We have lived for a time in a world that is lost. But perhaps it is not entirely lost. Perhaps something of that world lives on, not just in the ruins and the artifacts, but in the human spirit itself. The courage to venture into the unknown, the ingenuity to turn disadvantage into strength, the faith that the sea, for all its dangers, can be a path to something better. These are the gifts that Tyre gave to the world. These are the things that the Phoenicians understood, and these are the things that we, thousands of years later, can still learn from their story. The harbor is quiet now. The ships have all returned to port or are anchored safely offshore. The last light of the sun fades from the sky. The stars begin to appear, one by one, the same stars that the Phoenician navigators used to guide their way across the dark water. The city settles into sleep. The watch paces the walls. The sacred flame in the temple burns low. And somewhere out on the water, a single ship is setting sail, heading west into the gathering darkness, toward lands unknown and adventures unimagined. This is the spirit of Tyre. This is the legacy that endures. Thank you for joining me on this voyage into the past. I hope you have found it peaceful and illuminating. I hope it has carried you away from the worries of the present day and given you a glimpse of a world that was different from ours in many ways, but human in all the ways that matter. The story of Tyre is the story of ambition and resilience, of ingenuity and faith, of the eternal struggle between the sea and the land, between permanence and change. It is a story worth remembering. It is a story worth telling. And now, as the stars wheel overhead and the sea whispers its ancient lullaby, it is time to rest. Let the images of purple sails and limestone harbors fade gently into dreams. Let the voices of merchants and sailors grow distant and soft. Let the sound of the waves carry you into sleep, into the quiet darkness where all stories eventually go, waiting to be remembered again. Sleep well. Dream of distant ages and faraway places. Dream of the lost harbor of ancient Tyre. And when you wake, may you carry with you something of the courage and the spirit of those who sailed from that harbor so long ago into the vast and mysterious world. Good night, and may the sea be calm and the stars be bright wherever your journey takes you. Before you drift completely into sleep, let me share with you one final reflection on the nature of cities and the passage of time. Tyre was not the first great city to rise from the sea, and it was not the last to fall. Throughout human history, we have built our monuments and our fortresses. We have raised our walls and our temples. We have declared ourselves eternal, and time, patient and relentless, has proven us wrong again and again. The pyramids of Egypt still stand, but the civilization that built them is gone. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia are mounds of dirt and brick. The great library of Alexandria burned. The Colosseum of Rome is a ruin. Even Constantinople, the city that endured for 1,000 years after Rome itself fell, is now Istanbul, transformed beyond recognition. This is the way of things. This is the lesson that history teaches, again and again to every generation that will listen. And yet there is something in us that refuses to accept this lesson. We build our cities as if they will last forever. We invest them with meaning and identity. We tell stories about them that turn them into something more than mere collections of buildings and people. We make them sacred. We make them symbols. And when they fall, as they always eventually do, we mourn them as if we have lost something irreplaceable. In a way we have. Every city that falls takes with it a unique way of life, a particular vision of what human community can be. The fall of Tyre meant the end of the Phoenician world, the end of a culture that had existed for thousands of years. The languages they spoke are now dead, preserved only in fragments and inscriptions. The gods they worshipped are forgotten. The skills and knowledge they possessed, some of it at least, were lost, and the world is poorer for that loss, even if we barely remember what it is that we lost. But there is another side to this story. Cities fall, but the people who lived in them do not simply disappear. They scatter, they adapt, they carry their knowledge and their traditions to new places. The Phoenicians who survived the fall of Tyre did not vanish from history. Some became part of other communities, blending into the Greek and Roman world. Some moved to the colonies, to Carthage and the other cities that the Phoenicians had founded, carrying with them the memory of their homeland. And some perhaps simply told their children stories. Stories about the great city where their ancestors had lived. Stories about the ships and the purple dye and the temple of Melkart. Stories that kept the memory alive even after the physical city was gone. This is how cultures survive. Not through buildings and walls, but through stories and skills and traditions passed from one generation to the next. The alphabet that the Phoenicians invented did not die when Tyre fell. It spread and evolved and became the foundation of countless writing systems. The techniques of navigation and shipbuilding that they pioneered were adopted by other peoples and refined and passed on. The idea of trade as a civilizing force, the idea that you can grow wealthy and powerful not through conquest but through commerce, this too was part of the Phoenician legacy, and it is an idea that has shaped the modern world in profound ways. So even though Tyre fell, even though the Phoenician culture as it existed in the ancient world is gone, something of that culture endures. It lives on in ways that are subtle and often unrecognized, but no less real for being invisible. Think about this as you drift towards sleep. Think about the countless generations of people who lived in Tyre over the course of its long history. They were born and they grew up and they worked and they loved and they raised children and they grew old and they died, and then their children did the same, and their children after them, century after century, millennium after millennium. Each of them thought, as we all think, that their world was permanent, that the way things were in their time was the way things would always be, and each of them was wrong. The world changed. Sometimes slowly, sometimes catastrophically, but it always changed. And yet for all that change, for all that loss, something endured. The human capacity for resilience, the human ability to adapt and rebuild, the human refusal to simply give up in the face of disaster. This, more than anything else, is the true legacy of Tyre. Not the purple dye or the alphabet or the trade routes, important as those things are, but the simple fact that the people of Tyre, faced again and again with seemingly insurmountable challenges, found a way to survive. They survived because they were smart, they were clever, they were willing to take risks. They understood that the sea, which terrified so many of their neighbors, was not an enemy but an opportunity. They understood that you do not need a large territory or a powerful army to become wealthy and influential. You need a good harbor and a sturdy ship and the courage to sail beyond the horizon. They understood that the world is full of people who want things, and if you can get those things to them, if you can connect the person who has something with the person who wants it, then you can make yourself indispensable. These are lessons that are as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. The specific technologies change, the specific trade goods change, but the underlying principles remain the same. And they survived because they were willing to compromise. This is perhaps the most important lesson of all. Tyre was never the most powerful military force in its region. It could not conquer its neighbors. It could not defeat the great empires. But it did not have to. It survived by being useful to those empires, by paying tribute when tribute was demanded, by providing services that made conquest more trouble than it was worth. It survived by knowing when to fight and when to submit, by understanding that pride is a luxury that small states cannot always afford. This is a hard lesson. It is not a glorious lesson. It is the kind of lesson that does not make for inspiring speeches or heroic poems. But it is a lesson that kept Tyre alive for centuries when other cities fell. Of course, in the end, Tyre did fall. The strategy of compromise and adaptation could only take the city so far. Eventually, it encountered an enemy who would not be satisfied with tribute or alliance. Alexander the Great was not interested in a friendly relationship with Tyre. He wanted total dominance. He wanted to make an offering in the temple, not as a supplicant but as a conqueror, and when Tyre refused, he was willing to do the impossible to bring the city down. The causeway that he built was one of the great engineering feats of the ancient world. It should not have worked. It should have been washed away by storms. It should have bankrupted his treasury and exhausted his army. But Alexander refused to give up, and in the end, his refusal to accept the limits of what was possible changed the geography itself. The island became a peninsula, and Tyre, robbed of the thing that made it special, fell. There is a terrible irony in this. Tyre survived for so long because of the sea. It thrived because of the sea. Its entire identity was bound up with the sea. And when Alexander took the sea away, when he joined the island to the mainland, the city lost its soul. It continued to exist, of course. People still lived there. Trade still flowed through its harbors, but it was not the same city. It was not Tyre. Not really. It was just another port on a crowded coast, distinguished only by its ruins and its memories. This is what makes the fall of Tyre so poignant. It was not destroyed by a natural disaster or a plague or the gradual decline of an economy. It was destroyed by a deliberate act of human will, by a man who could not tolerate the existence of a place that refused to bow to him. And the method of destruction was itself a kind of violation, a forcible transformation of the natural world to serve the purposes of war. Alexander did not just conquer Tyre, he unmade it. He turned it into something it was never meant to be. And once that transformation was complete, there was no going back. The causeway remained, the silt accumulated, the island became land, and the sea, which had been Tyre's protector and its reason for being, was pushed back, inch by inch, until it no longer touched the walls of the city at all. But even in this tragedy, there is something worth contemplating. The causeway is still there. 23 centuries after Alexander built it, it still connects the old island to the mainland. It is now a permanent feature of the landscape, widened and built over, barely recognizable as the military expedient it once was. But it is there, and in a strange way, it is a monument, not just to Alexander's conquest, but to the stubbornness of human ambition. Alexander wanted to conquer Tyre, and he did, but in doing so, he created something that outlasted his own empire by thousands of years. His empire fragmented and fell within a generation of his death. The kingdoms of his successors fought and dissolved. His name became legend, and then legend became history, and then history became archaeology. But the causeway remained, a silent witness to the fact that sometimes our works endure in ways we never intended, for reasons we never imagined. Think of the millions of people who have walked across that causeway in the centuries since it was built. Think of the children playing where Alexander's soldiers once labored. Think of the fishermen setting out from what was once a channel of water and is now a narrow strip of land. Think of the archaeologists carefully excavating the ancient ruins, trying to piece together the story of a city that most of the world has forgotten. All of them are part of the story of Tyre. All of them are connected, whether they know it or not, to the long chain of history that stretches back to the Bronze Age, to the Phoenician sailors who first looked at this rocky island and saw not a barren refuge but a gateway to the world. And this perhaps is the final lesson of Tyre. History is not just about the great events, the battles and the sieges and the conquests. It is also about the continuity of human life, the fact that people go on living and working and raising families even in the midst of catastrophe and change. The fall of Tyre was a tragedy for those who experienced it. But life went on. The survivors rebuilt. New communities formed. The work of the harbor continued, even if on a smaller scale, even if under new masters. And eventually, the trauma faded, the memories dimmed, and Tyre became just another place where people lived, a place with a remarkable past but an ordinary present. This is the pattern of human history. We build and we destroy and we build again. We tell ourselves stories about golden ages and fallen glories. We mourn what is lost and celebrate what endures. We try to learn from the past, though we often fail, and we go on, generation after generation, making the same mistakes and achieving the same triumphs, driven by the same hopes and fears and dreams. Tyre is special because its story is so well documented, because the ruins are still visible, because the ancient writers preserved so much information about it. But in a deeper sense, Tyre is not special at all. It is just one example of a pattern that has repeated itself thousands of times across human history. A city rises, it prospers, it becomes powerful, and then for one reason or another, it falls, and life goes on. So as you lie here in the darkness, as sleep finally begins to claim you, remember the harbor of ancient Tyre. Remember the purple sails and the smell of the sea. Remember the merchants and the sailors and the priests. Remember the ships setting out for unknown lands and the wealth flowing into the warehouses. Remember the walls standing strong against 100 sieges. Remember the causeway slowly extending across the water, bringing doom with every foot of progress. Remember the final assault and the fall and the silence that followed. Remember all of this, and then let it go. Let it fade into the comfortable darkness of sleep. Let the weight of history lift from your shoulders. Let the voices of the past grow quiet. You are here, now, in the present moment. You are safe and warm, and drifting toward rest. The ancient world is gone. The struggles and triumphs of Tyre are finished. The sea still rolls on, but it no longer brings ships laden with purple and gold. The stars still shine, but no one navigates by them anymore, not in the way the Phoenicians did. The world has changed, utterly and completely. And yet, in a way, nothing has changed. People still dream of distant horizons. People still take to the sea in search of fortune. People still build cities and hope they will last forever. People still tell stories to make sense of the past and to guide the future. We are not so different from them, the people of ancient Tyre. We face different challenges, we have different tools, but we are driven by the same fundamental human impulses. And perhaps that is the real reason to remember Tyre. Not because it was unique, but because it was not. Because in its story we can see our own story. The story of every community that has ever tried to build something lasting in a world that is always changing. We see the courage it takes to venture into the unknown. We see the ingenuity it takes to thrive in a hostile environment. We see the compromises that are necessary for survival. And we see in the end the fragility of even the mightiest works, the reminder that nothing we build will last forever, that time will eventually claim even the greatest cities and reduce them to scattered stones and fading memories. But we also see the endurance of the human spirit. We see that even when cities fall, the people endure. We see that knowledge and culture and tradition can outlast any physical structure. We see that the things we create, the ideas we develop, the connections we make, these things can echo through the centuries and shape the world in ways we cannot imagine. The people of Tyre are gone, but their alphabet lives on. Their ships are rotted into nothing, but the principles of navigation they pioneered live on. Their gods are forgotten, but the human need for meaning and transcendence lives on. This is how we defeat time. Not by building walls that cannot be broken, but by creating things that can be passed on, that can be adapted and transformed and kept alive by each new generation. So rest now. Let your mind release its grip on these images and ideas. Let the story of Tyre settle into the deep places of your memory, where it will remain, a quiet presence, a reminder of the vastness of history and the smallness of any individual life within it. You are one person, living in one moment in one corner of the world, and yet you are connected, through the long chain of human experience, to every person who has ever lived, including the people who walked the streets of ancient Tyre, who worked in its harbors, who sailed its ships, who prayed in its temples. You share with them the fundamental condition of being human, of living in time, of trying to make meaning out of the chaos and beauty of existence. And with that thought, with that connection, let yourself drift away. Let the images fade, let the sounds recede, let the darkness become complete and comfortable. Let sleep take you gently and completely. The story is over, the voyage is done, the harbor is quiet, the sails are furled, the ships are at rest. And so, at last are you. Sleep well, dream peacefully. And when you wake, may you carry with you a small measure of the wisdom and courage of those who came before. The sailors and merchants and builders of the ancient world, who faced the vastness of the sea and the uncertainty of the future with nothing but faith and determination. Good night. Sleep deep, and may your dreams be filled with purple sails and distant shores and the eternal song of the sea. In the final moments before sleep claims you completely, let us return once more to that harbor, to that island in the sea. But this time let us not visit it at any specific moment in its long history. Instead, let us see it as a palimpsest, a layering of all the moments that ever were, all existing simultaneously in the space between waking and dreaming. See the Bronze Age fishermen pulling their nets from the water, their boats small and simple, their lives defined by the rhythms of the tide and the seasons. See the Phoenician merchants of the first millennium, standing on the docks in their robes of purple, watching their ships depart for Carthage and Tarshish and the distant Tin Islands. See the soldiers on the walls during the 13-year siege by Nebuchadnezzar, their faces gaunt with hunger, but their resolve unbroken. See Alexander's causeway slowly extending across the water like a scar, like a promise, like a doom. See the Roman engineers repairing the harbors, the Byzantine priests consecrating new churches on the ruins of pagan temples. See the Crusader knights riding through streets that are both familiar and strange. See the Ottoman fishermen mending their nets in the shadow of ruined columns. See the archaeologists of the modern era, carefully brushing away dirt from fragments of pottery, trying to read the story written in broken stone. All of these moments are real. All of them happened. And in the strange geography of memory and imagination, they all exist still, layered one on top of another, like the strata of an archaeological site. This is what history is. Ultimately, not a single straight line from past to present, but a vast, tangled web of moments and lives and events, all connected, all influencing each other in ways both obvious and subtle. When you study history, when you learn about a place like Tyre, you are not just learning facts and dates. You are entering into a relationship with the past. You are acknowledging that the people who lived before you were real, that their lives mattered, that their struggles and triumphs have something to teach you. And what does Tyre teach us? It teaches us that geography is not destiny. The island that became Tyre had no natural advantages except for its harbors. There was no farmland, no forest, no mines full of gold or silver. And yet the people who settled there turned those harbors into the foundation of a commercial empire. They looked at the sea, which most people saw as a barrier or a source of danger, and they saw opportunity. They learned to build ships that could withstand storms. They learned to navigate by the stars. They learned to establish trading relationships with peoples who spoke different languages and worshipped different gods. They turned their disadvantages into advantages through sheer ingenuity and determination. It teaches us that wealth and power come in many forms. The great empires of the ancient Near East, the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians, built their power on land and armies. They conquered vast territories. They ruled over millions of people. And they looked down on the Phoenician cities as minor players, useful for their ships and their trade, but not truly significant in the great game of empires. And yet when you compare the lasting impact of these civilizations, the Phoenicians hold their own. The alphabet they invented has shaped the world far more than any of the military conquests of their neighbors. The trade networks they established created connections between cultures that would otherwise have remained isolated. They were a small people, but their influence was enormous. It teaches us about the limits of military power. Again and again the mightiest armies of the ancient world marched to the shores opposite Tyre and demanded its surrender. And again Tyre refused and survived. The Assyrians could not take it. The Babylonians could not take it. Even the Persians, with their vast resources, never tried to force the issue. Tyre's walls and its control of the sea made it effectively impregnable. It took a genius like Alexander to finally crack the puzzle, and even he had to resort to a solution that was as much an act of environmental engineering as it was military strategy. The causeway was not just a way to attack the city. It was a way to change the fundamental nature of the city, to strip it of the thing that made it strong. This is a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through direct confrontation but through finding a way to change the rules of the game. It teaches us about the fragility of human achievements. For all its strength, for all its wealth, for all its centuries of success, Tyre fell. And not just fell, but fell in a way that was particularly cruel, transformed from an island into a peninsula. Its very identity erased along with its independence. The causeway that Alexander built is still there, a permanent monument to the fact that even the most impregnable fortresses can be overcome, even the most enduring civilizations can be broken. This is a sobering lesson. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, that all human works are temporary, that time and change will eventually claim everything we build. And yet it also teaches us about resilience. Tyre fell, but it did not disappear. People continued to live there. The city was rebuilt. Trade continued. Even if on a smaller scale, the traditions and skills of the Phoenicians were passed on, even if in diluted or transformed ways. The story of Tyre did not end with Alexander's conquest. It continued for another 2,000 years, through Roman rule and Byzantine Christianity and Islamic conquest and Crusader occupation and Ottoman governance. The city survived all of this, not as the power it once was, but as a living community, a place where people made their homes and raised their families and tried to build decent lives in the midst of historical upheaval. This is resilience. This is the stubborn refusal of human beings to simply give up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So what does all of this mean for you? Lying here in the darkness, on the edge of sleep. Perhaps it means that your own struggles and challenges, whatever they may be, are part of a long human tradition of facing difficulty and finding a way through. Perhaps it means that the things you create, the work you do, the relationships you build, these things have value, even if they are not permanent, even if they will one day be forgotten. Perhaps it means that you are part of something larger than yourself, connected to a vast web of human experience that stretches back to the very beginning of civilization and will continue long after you are gone. Or perhaps it means nothing at all, except that history is interesting, that the past is full of stories worth hearing, and that sometimes it is good to let your mind wander through distant times and places as you drift off to sleep. There is no single lesson that Tyre teaches. There is no simple moral to the story. History is not a fable with a clear message. It is complex and contradictory and full of ambiguity. The same event can be seen as a triumph or a tragedy depending on your perspective. The same person can be a hero or a villain, depending on whose story you are hearing. The fall of Tyre was a disaster for the Tyrians, but it was a victory for Alexander. The causeway destroyed the independence of the city, but it also created a permanent land connection that made the region more accessible to trade and travel. The alphabet that the Phoenicians invented has been an enormous gift to humanity, but it was originally developed for the mundane purpose of keeping business records. History does not come with neat explanations or clear lessons. It simply is. And we, looking back at it from our own time, try to make sense of it as best we can. But perhaps that is the real value of studying history. Not that it gives us answers, but that it gives us questions. It makes us think about what we value and why. It makes us consider the choices that people in the past made and wonder if we would have made different choices in their place. It makes us aware of how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. It humbles us by showing us how vast and complex the human story is, how many millions of people have lived and died, how many civilizations have risen and fallen, how many ideas have been born and forgotten and rediscovered. And it connects us, giving us a sense that we are part of something that transcends our individual lives, that our own struggles and achievements are threads in a much larger tapestry. The harbor of ancient Tyre is quiet now, not with the temporary quiet of night, but with the permanent quiet of abandonment. The ships that once filled it are gone, the warehouses are empty. The merchants and sailors have been dust for millennia. The purple dye is no longer produced. The alphabet has evolved beyond recognition. Even the island itself is no longer an island. Everything has changed. And yet, if you close your eyes and let your imagination carry you back, you can still hear the voices, still smell the sea and the spices, still feel the rough wood of the docks under your feet. The past is gone, but it is not entirely lost. It lives on in memory and in story, in the fragments that archaeologists uncover, in the words that historians write, in the quiet moments when we let ourselves drift back across the centuries and wonder what it must have been like. And now, finally, it is time to let go. You have walked the streets of ancient Tyre. You have sailed on its ships. You have witnessed its glory and its fall. You have thought about what it means, what it teaches, what it says about the human condition. You have done enough thinking for one night. Now it is time to rest. Time to release your hold on consciousness and let sleep take over completely. Time to stop trying to understand and simply to be. The story of Tyre will still be there when you wake. The past will still be there waiting to be explored. But for now, for this moment, let it all go. Let the images fade into darkness. Let the thoughts slow and blur and finally stop. Let the rhythm of your breathing become the only thing that matters. In and out, slow and steady and peaceful. The sea is calm tonight. The stars are bright. The wind is gentle, and somewhere far away, in a place that exists now only in memory and imagination, a ship is setting sail from the harbor of Tyre, heading west into the unknown. The captain stands at the steering oar, his eyes on the horizon. The crew works the rigging, their movements practiced and efficient. The sail fills with wind, and the ship begins to move, cutting through the dark water, leaving behind the lights of the city, heading out into the vast emptiness of the Mediterranean night. They do not know what they will find. They do not know if they will return. But they go anyway, because this is what they do, because the sea is calling, because somewhere beyond the horizon there is something worth finding. And you, lying here in the darkness, you are like that ship. You are heading into your own unknown, into the mystery of sleep and dreams. You do not know what you will find there. You do not know what you will remember when you wake, but you go anyway, because this is what you do. Because sleep is calling, because somewhere in the depths of the night there is rest and renewal and peace. So cast off from the shore of wakefulness, unfurl the sails of imagination. Let the wind of exhaustion carry you away from the land of thought and worry and into the open sea of sleep. The voyage is just beginning. The night is long, and the sea is waiting. Sleep now, sleep deep, sleep well. The harbor of ancient Tyre is fading into the mists of time, becoming once again what it always was, a story, a memory, a dream. But dreams have their own reality, and tonight, In your dreams, you may find yourself walking those ancient streets, breathing that ancient air, living for a moment in that lost world. And that is good. That is as it should be. The past is gone, but it lives on in us, in the stories we tell and the dreams we dream. Sleep now, and dream of purple sails and distant shores. Dream of stone harbors and the eternal sea. Dream of a city that rose from the water and returned to the water and left behind only memories and lessons, and the eternal question of what it means to build something lasting in a world that is always changing. The last light fades, the last sound dies away. There is only the gentle rhythm of your breathing and the soft darkness of the night, and somewhere very far away, very long ago, a ship sails on, carrying its cargo of purple and gold and spices, carrying its crew of hopeful sailors, carrying its burden of human ambition and courage and fragility into the vast and indifferent sea. And you here and now carry your own burden of thought and memory and experience into the vast and gentle darkness of sleep. May your voyage be peaceful. May your rest be deep. May you wake refreshed and ready for whatever challenges tomorrow brings. Good night, and farewell to the lost harbor of ancient Tyre.